It's a chilly November evening in 1918. Crowds gather on both sides of a concrete barrier that has scarred a city for decades. Suddenly, under the cover of night, gates that were once guarded with orders to shoot are opening. East and West Berliners embrace each other in tears and joy atop the Berlin Wall itself. For 28 years, this wall stood immovable, a symbol of the Cold War's Iron Division. Yet in one unforgettable night, it was breached. How could something so permanent fall so swiftly? What really brought the Berlin Wall down, seemingly overnight? To answer that, we must rewind and examine the events and forces over years and decades that led to that history-changing night. What made the Berlin Wall fall in just one night? The hidden forces revealed, the long-term causes. A divided Germany. In the aftermath of World War II, Germany was carved up by the victorious Allies. Berlin, the nation's capital, was split into East and West, two halves controlled by opposing ideologies. As the Cold War deepened, this divided city became a flashpoint. The first major showdown came in 1948, when Soviet authorities blockaded West Berlin in an attempt to force the Western Allies out. In response, the Western powers launched the Berlin Airlift, flying in supplies daily for almost a year until the Soviets lifted the blockade. Still, Berlin's fate hung in the balance as East and West solidified their rivalry. By the late 1950s, East Germany's population was voting with their feet, fleeing by the thousands to the West every week in search of freedom and opportunity. To stem this tide, East Germany's communist leader Walter Ulbricht pushed for a drastic solution. With Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev's consent, he moved to seal off West Berlin. In the early hours of August 13, 1901, Berliners awoke to find their city sliced in two by barbed wire and armed troops. Streets, railway lines, and even families were abruptly divided. In the days that followed, that provisional barbed wire was replaced with concrete and mortar. A wall had risen, almost overnight, cutting through the heart of the city and the lives of its people. Decades of standoff. For the next 28 years, the Berlin Wall stood as the starkest symbol of the Cold War. On one side, West Germany flourished as a democracy with a booming economy. On the other, East Germany remained a sealed socialist state under one-party rule. The wall itself was fortified into a deadly obstacle course. On its western side, the wall became a canvas for defiance, covered in colorful graffiti art. On the eastern side, it remained a blank, forbidden slab. It was an obstacle course, concrete slabs crowned with barbed wire, guard towers with searchlights, tripwire machine guns, and a sand-covered death strip that made footprints easy to spot. Western leaders denounced the edifice. President John F. Kennedy defiantly declared, "Ich bin ein Berliner." In 1963, in solidarity with the city's residents, and later U.S. presidents called it a wall of shame. Yet as cruel as it was, the wall also imposed a tense stability. In a grim way, it kept the Cold War from boiling over in Berlin. Still, the human cost was enormous. Many who dared to challenge the barrier paid with their lives. In 1962, an 18-year-old bricklayer named Peter Fechter was shot and left to bleed to death on the eastern side, as helpless onlookers in the West shouted in vain. Such tragedies showed the world the bitter reality of life behind the wall. With time, escapes became fewer as the border grew ever more secure. Families resigned themselves to separation, communicating through letters and rare visits by elderly relatives allowed to cross. In the 1970s, a brief thaw in relations, Ostpolitik, allowed a trickle of Western visitors into East Berlin and eased some tensions. But the wall remained impregnable to ordinary East Germans. It dominated the skyline and psyche of Berlin, a daily reminder that an entire population was held captive. Yet, behind closed doors and in whispered conversations, the desire for freedom never disappeared. Decades of propaganda could not extinguish the basic hope that one day the wall might come down. Life behind the wall. Under the watchful eye. Daily life in East Germany was a study in contrasts. ordinary routines carried out under extraordinary restrictions. Everyone had a job and a home, and the streets were orderly. But consumer goods were limited, choices were narrow, and the state monitored citizens relentlessly. Shoppers often waited in long lines for basic staples, and prized fruits like bananas were rare treats, usually only glimpsed in Western television ads. The secret police, the Stasi, had informants in every neighborhood. A casual remark criticizing the government, even to a friend, could land someone under suspicion. Telephones were tapped, mail was read, and every typewriter was registered with the authorities. Many learned to wear a mask in public, to smile at the party slogans, and never let their true thoughts be known except in whispers at home. The Ministry for State Security, the infamous Stasi, had grown into an all-seeing apparatus. By the 1980s, it employed a vast network of officers and informants. Some estimates suggested 1 in every 6 or 7 East Germans covertly worked with the Stasi. Everyone was a suspect, and trust was a rare commodity. Neighbors, classmates, even friends could be reporting your every word. Under such constant scrutiny, people learned to lead double lives, one public towing the official line and one private, where true feelings were whispered only to the most trusted family members, yearning for freedom. Despite the outward calm, a quiet yearning suffused everyday life. Most East Germans could not travel to the West, not even to see relatives just across the border. Families were split by the wall, grandparents growing old without ever hugging their grandchildren. Some risked everything to escape. Daring souls dug tunnels under the wall, clung to the undersides of train cars, or floated in hot air balloons across the dark sky. Over 5,000 succeeded in finding freedom, but at least 140 people died, shot or killed in desperate attempts to flee. For those who stayed behind, the wall was a daily reminder that they were prisoners of their own country. In secret, they tuned into Western radio or snuck looks at Western TV, catching faint glimpses of a world beyond. And the more they saw what was possible, the more their quiet discontent grew. Even Western music and culture, though officially denounced, seeped in and stirred dreams. In 1988, American rock star Bruce Springsteen played an authorized concert in East Berlin, drawing a crowd of 160,000. From the stage, he declared in imperfect German that he hoped one day all the barriers will be torn down. The crowd roared, a joyful, subversive echo of their own secret aspirations. Moments like these fueled the quiet resolve of East Germans to keep the flame of hope alive. The global context in the 1980s. Decades of standoff. For the next 28 years, the Berlin Wall stood as the starkest symbol of the Cold War. On one side, West Germany flourished as a democracy with a booming economy. On the other, East Germany remained a sealed socialist state under one-party rule. The wall itself was fortified into a deadly obstacle course. On its western side, the wall became a canvas for defiance, covered in colorful graffiti art. On the eastern side, it remained a blank, forbidden slab. It was an obstacle course. Concrete slabs crowned with barbed wire, guard towers with searchlights, tripwire machine guns, and a sand-covered death strip that made footprints easy to spot. Western leaders denounced the edifice. President John F. Kennedy defiantly declared, "Ich bin ein Berliner," in 1963 in solidarity with the city's residents, and later U.S. presidents called it a wall of shame. Yet as cruel as it was, the wall also imposed a tense stability. In a grim way, it kept the Cold War from boiling over in Berlin. Winds of change. In the 1980s, cracks began to form in the once solid facade of the communist world. Mikhail Gorbachev rose to lead the Soviet Union in 1985 and introduced reforms: Glasnost, openness, and Perestroika, restructuring, signaling a new tolerance for change. Crucially, Moscow declared it would no longer send tanks to prop up the hardline regimes of Eastern Europe. This renunciation of force, jokingly dubbed the Sinatra Doctrine because it allowed Eastern Bloc leaders to do things their way, was a radical departure from the old Brezhnev doctrine that had sent tanks into Hungary in 1956 and Czechoslovakia in 1968. And it came not a moment too soon. the Soviet Union was economically strained and unwilling to prop up unpopular regimes by force. Significantly, just a few months earlier in June 1989, Chinese leaders had brutally crushed a pro-democracy protest in Beijing's Tiananmen Square, showing the world a bloodier path. But in Eastern Europe, Gorbachev's Soviet Union chose restraint, giving people space to press for change. One by one, the nations of Eastern Europe stirred. In Poland, the Solidarity movement forced the communist government to hold semi-free elections in June 1989, resulting in a non-communist prime minister, a revolutionary breakthrough. In Hungary, reformist leaders began dismantling border fences and quietly opened the door to the West. By the autumn of 1989, thousands of East Germans on vacation in Hungary seized the chance to slip across the newly opened border into Austria, escaping into West Germany. The Iron Curtain was starting to lift beyond Berlin, and East Germans took notice. The free world's influence. At the same time, pressure and inspiration also came from the free world. Western leaders for decades had condemned the division of Europe. In 1987, standing before Berlin's Brandenburg Gate, US President Ronald Reagan issued a dramatic challenge. "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." Western news broadcasts and radio waves carried ideas of democracy across the border, giving hope to those who listened in secret. East Germans who could pick up West German television saw prosperous cities and personal freedoms, a vivid, living contrast to their own restricted lives. Relations between the superpowers were also improving by the late 1980s. The United States and Soviet Union signed arms reduction treaties, easing the fear of nuclear confrontation. The Cold War's chill was thawing, and global public opinion was firmly on the side of liberty. Western Europe also lent quiet support to reformers. Leaders like Britain's Margaret Thatcher and France's François Mitterrand publicly welcomed the liberalization in the East, although privately, they were cautious about the idea of a suddenly reunified Germany. Overall, however, the West offered encouragement and economic incentives for change, signaling that an open, democratic Eastern Europe would be embraced. By 1989, the momentum of history was unmistakable. Peaceful revolutions were unfolding across Eastern Europe, and the Berlin Wall's days appeared numbered. East Germany under pressure. Exodus and unrest. By 1989, East Germany was a nation under immense strain. Early that year, sham local elections made clear that the regime would even lie about votes to claim support, a sign of its deepening illegitimacy. Then came an exodus. Tens of thousands of citizens were fleeing the country by any roundabout route they could find. When Hungary opened its border with Austria in mid-1989, entire families from East Germany drove south and never returned. Others crowded into West German embassies in Prague and Warsaw, literally climbing fences and camping in courtyards as they pleaded for passage to freedom. This steady drain of young, educated citizens quickly grew into a crisis for East Germany's leadership. And those who remained behind began to voice their anger publicly. In cities like Leipzig, what began as weekly prayer meetings at a church turned into mass protests. Every Monday, more people poured into the streets, carrying candles and daring to demand change. They chanted, "Wir sind das Volk." We are the people. A bold proclamation that the nation belonged to them, not the Communist Party. The roar of peaceful protest grew louder by the week, echoing through city squares and down Stalinist boulevards. The regime's facade was cracking, and the world looked on in astonishment and hope. The regime totters. By October 1989, the regime's grip was visibly faltering. On October 7th, East Germany tried to celebrate its 40th anniversary with pomp and parades, but the spectacle was upstaged by unrest. Crowds of East Germans gathered in the streets, openly defying their government even as official ceremonies played out. Mikhail Gorbachev, attending as an honored guest, pointedly warned East Berlin's rulers that life punishes those who come too late. A thinly veiled push for urgent reform. The message was clear. The Soviet Union would not intervene to prop them up. Within 2 weeks, the longtime hardline leader Erich Honecker was forced to resign. He was replaced by Egon Krenz, a younger official who promised a Wende, a turning point, to quell the uprising. But the real momentum for change was coming from the streets, not from the new man in charge. Throughout October, the Monday demonstrations swelled in size and spread to other cities. On October 9th, some 70,000 citizens marched peacefully in Leipzig, risking a crackdown that, to everyone's relief, never came. Emboldened by that night, crowds swelled to hundreds of thousands across East Germany by early November, all calling for freedom to travel and democratic reforms. On November 4th, 1989, East Berlin saw its largest protest yet. An officially sanctioned rally turned into a peaceful outpouring of dissent, with an estimated 500,000 people cramming Alexanderplatz to demand freedom of speech and open borders. The regime's own television cameras, for the first time, broadcast some of the citizens' speeches live. The truth was undeniable. The East German population had shed its fear. Krenz and his Politburo watched this tidal wave of people power with alarm. They decided to make a desperate concession. They would ease the travel restrictions that had long hemmed East Germans in. Little did they know how quickly this decision would snowball into the collapse of the wall itself. The events of November 9th, 1989. The press conference. Thursday, November 9th, 1989, began like any other day, with tension hanging thick in the air. Egon Krenz and his East German leadership, desperate to stem the tide of unrest, hurriedly approved a new set of travel regulations that afternoon. Their idea was to grant citizens limited permission to leave East Germany, hoping this small opening would relieve the mounting pressure. At 6 p.m. that evening, government spokesman Günter Schabowski sat before a room full of reporters in East Berlin to announce the regime's latest decisions. For nearly an hour, he recited dull talking points and minor reforms. But then, just before wrapping up, a journalist raised a question about the travel law. Schabowski, rifling through his notes, looked slightly confused. He hadn't been fully briefed. He found the memo and haltingly read that East German citizens would henceforth be allowed to travel abroad through the border crossings. Reporters sensed a bombshell and pressed him urgently. Did that include going into West Berlin? Yes, Schabowski affirmed. All the border checkpoints in Berlin would be opened for travel. When does it take effect? He hesitated, then gave the answer heard around the world. As far as I know, effective immediately, without delay. Those last words were history turning on a dime. Within minutes, news flashed on Western TV. East Germany was opening its borders. Tonight. East Berliners watching the broadcast stood up in shock. Could it be true? After a lifetime behind walls, were they really free to go? Opening the gates. As night fell, thousands of East Berliners rushed to the wall's checkpoints to see if the news was true. At the Bornholmer Strasse crossing, a trickle of people quickly swelled into a sea of humanity. They gathered at the barricades, demanding to be let through. The border guards, stunned and unprepared, frantically called their superiors for guidance. The orders that came back were muddled. Allow a few people with proper papers to pass if needed, but do not open the gates completely. The crowd only grew larger and bolder. Tor auf! Open the gate! They chanted, their voices united. These were ordinary East Germans, families with children, workers, elders, no longer willing to be penned in. By 10:30 p.m., the standoff had reached a fever pitch. At Bornholmer Strasse, Lieutenant Colonel Harold Jaeger, the officer in charge, faced an unbearable situation. He had a restive crowd in front of him and ambiguous orders from above. Unwilling to shoot innocents and unable to hold them back any longer, he made a fateful choice. He told his men to open the barrier. Pandemonium broke loose, in the best possible way. A tremendous cheer went up as people surged across the border. East Berliners were met by West Berliners on the other side with laughter, tears, and bottles of champagne. Strangers fell into each other's arms, crying for joy. The news spread like wildfire. Soon, at crossing after crossing, guards stood aside or were swept up in the moment. And Berliners from east and west flowed freely back and forth. Crowds climbed up on top of the wall, singing and celebrating above the graffiti-covered concrete that had divided them for so long. At the Brandenburg Gate, a place where East German border soldiers once had shoot-to-kill orders. People danced together under the night sky. Car horns blared in triumph and church bells pealed with abandon. Friends and families long separated by the barrier were finally reunited, some literally on top of the wall, feeling a sense of wholeness at last. What had been unthinkable just hours earlier was now a reality. Berlin was united in jubilation, if not yet officially unified as one city. The Iron Curtain had been torn open, not by force of arms, but by the sheer will of ordinary people. Immediate aftermath. Euphoria and unity. In the days immediately after the wall opened, Berlin was swept up in a wave of jubilation. East Germans by the tens of thousands poured into West Berlin, many seeing the western half of their city for the first time. They were greeted like long-lost family. West Berliners stood at the checkpoints clapping and cheering, offering flowers, beer, and even cash gifts called welcome money to their newfound visitors. Trabi cars, the little East German Trabants, puttered through gaps in the wall, honking amid the celebration as families from the East ventured out to explore the vibrant streets of the West. Champagne corks popped at the Brandenburg Gate, where crowds from both sides climbed up and danced atop the once fearsome wall. In the days that followed, the wall transformed from a prison barrier into a communal playground. Berliners armed with sledgehammers and pickaxes began chipping away at it, each swing a personal act of triumph. These so-called wall peckers laughed, cried, and hugged as they pried off chunks of concrete to keep as souvenirs of their freedom. The border guards, with nothing left to guard, stood by or joined in the merriment. A new sense of unity filled the chilly autumn air. West Berlin's mayor proclaimed that Germans were the happiest people in the world that night. And indeed, the euphoric spirit spread far beyond Berlin, through all of Germany and around the globe, toward reunification. The political upheaval was just as dramatic as the street celebrations. The East German government, stunned by the turn of events, found its power evaporating. In the weeks after November 9th, it lifted more restrictions and opened dialogue with opposition leaders. In early December, Egon Krenz and the rest of the Communist Politburo resigned en masse, effectively admitting that their era was over. A caretaker government led by reform-minded Prime Minister Hans Maudrow took the helm to manage the transition until elections could be held. Under massive public pressure, the once dominant Communist Party abandoned its monopoly on power and agreed to hold free elections in the spring of 1990. As East Germans tasted freedom and debated their future, the idea of reunifying with West Germany moved from a dream to an imminent reality. West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, sensing history on the move, proposed a roadmap for reunification. His plan gained broad support both among Germans and internationally. In March 1990, East Germans went to the polls in their first truly free election, and they overwhelmingly chose candidates who promised speedy reunification. Over the summer of 1990, officials from East and West Germany, alongside the United States, Soviet Union, Britain, and France, negotiated the terms of reunification with the four Allied powers from World War II, signing the 2+4 agreement that peacefully ended the post-war division. Not everyone abroad was immediately enthusiastic about a reunified Germany. Some Western allies voiced quiet fears, but those concerns were eventually alleviated. In the 2+4 talks, East and West Germany worked with the four Allied powers to ensure that a united Germany would be peaceful and respect all borders. By the time of unity, international support coalesced around the German people's right to determine their own future. On October 3, 1990, less than 1 year after Berliners danced on the wall, Germany officially became one country again. Crowds gathered as the black-red-gold flag of unity was hoisted, tears of joy in many eyes. What started as a spontaneous burst of freedom at the Berlin Wall had culminated in the peaceful reunification of a nation once split in two. The mighty wall itself, now irrelevant, was swiftly dismantled. Only fragments were left standing as memorials of its rise and miraculous fall. The wall's legacy. A symbol transformed. The Berlin Wall's collapse marked the dawn of a new era. A barrier that had long symbolized the world's deepest division was suddenly transformed into a beacon of hope and unity. Images of Berliners dancing atop the wall flashed across the globe, inspiring millions. The Cold War, which had cast its shadow for over 4 decades, began to thaw at an astonishing pace. In the months after November 1989, one communist regime after another fell across Eastern Europe. Peaceful revolutions swept through places like Czechoslovakia, the Velvet Revolution, while in Romania, a bloody uprising that December overthrew the dictator Nicolae Ceausescu. Within 2 years, even the Soviet Union would crumble. The Iron Curtain lifted for good. The fall of the wall was the catalyst for this wave of change, and its most enduring symbol. To this day, the fall of the Berlin Wall signifies the triumph of ordinary people over oppressive systems, proof that no wall can forever contain the human yearning for freedom. Never forget. Today, the legacy of the Berlin Wall's fall lives on in both concrete and memory. Several sections of the wall still stand in Berlin, preserved as solemn reminders of the past. Pieces of the wall also journeyed beyond Germany. Segments stand today in cities like Washington, London, and Tokyo. Tangible fragments of history serving as universal symbols of freedom's victory over tyranny. Where armed guards once patrolled with orders to shoot, tourists now walk freely, and vibrant murals cover pieces of the once gray barrier, transforming it into a canvas of hope. Every year on November 9th, Germans commemorate the night the wall came down. They hold concerts at the Brandenburg Gate, light memorial candles along the wall's old path, and tell their children about the time when freedom prevailed over division. Reunified Germany, although not without challenges, has achieved something remarkable: the peaceful melding of 2 societies that had been forced apart for a generation. Of course, unification brought challenges, from economic disparities to blending different social systems. But Germans met them hand in hand. In 1991, the reunified Germany's parliament voted to move the capital from Bonn back to Berlin, a poignant restoration for a once divided city. The fall of the wall also imparted a lesson to the world. It showed that even the mightiest divisions can be overcome when people refuse to give up. With courage, persistence, and peaceful protest, ordinary citizens really can change the course of history. The story of the Berlin Wall offers enduring hope in a world still grappling with conflicts and new barriers. Built overnight in 1961 to divide and subdue, the wall fell in a single extraordinary night in 1980, bringing an end to an age of separation. Its legacy continues to inspire, a reminder that no matter how high or long a wall may stand, it can never extinguish the human spirit's desire for freedom. Even the darkest night can give way to the light of dawn. As our journey through history comes to an end, one truth stands clear. The Berlin Wall did not fall by accident, and it did not fall because of one man's misstatement. It fell because the forces of change had been building for years, and the people themselves finally seized the moment. On that November night, the courage of ordinary East Germans met the last gasp of a repressive regime, and together they pushed open the gates to freedom. In a matter of hours, the physical and ideological barrier that had defined a generation ceased to exist. The Berlin Wall's collapse reminds us that even the mightiest walls can be brought down by human resolve. It was a triumph born of patience, pressure, and an unrelenting yearning to be free. So, what really brought the wall down overnight? The unyielding spirit of the people did, a spirit that proved stronger than concrete and barbed wire. Thank you for listening to The Berlin Wall's Collapse. What really brought it down overnight? May the legacy of that night continue to inspire hope around the world, reminding us all that no barrier is permanent, and that unity and freedom will always, in time, prevail.